All right, welcome to episode 10 of Just a Game. Just me and you, Jordan. How you doing today?
I'm good, dude. How you doing?
Not too bad, not too bad. I actually wanted to start off this episode, just it's a little bit off topic. Well, it's on topic, but a little bit off topic. But basically, I had this, I don't want to say it's a revelation or anything, but I guess a correlation between when I was playing my session last night and a video I saw online. I don't really know how often you're on social media, doom scrolling or anything like that. Probably close to zero.
Not zero, no, but probably not as much as you, but not zero.
I've limited it, but yeah. Basically, it's cool. I saw this video of this guy flying a helicopter with a student of his. I think it's like one of these training helicopters, like super small. And the engine goes out, and they start going downhill. And his student is like kind of panicking, obviously, because you're like 5,000 or whatever you are, 1,000, 2,000 feet in the air. The engine just goes out, and you're just starting to go down. But I found it very interesting how it relates to poker for the pilot, because you could tell he's a little off, but what he does is he's kind of coaching himself through the process of a very stressful situation. No different to if you were at a final table or you have a really big river decision on the bubble or something like that, and you kind of coach yourself through it where it's high stress. And as they're crashing, he's basically broadcasting what's happening and coaching himself through this really intense moment.
Mm-hmm.
I found it just super interesting.
Yeah, sure. Sounds interesting.
Yeah, so where you try to just, instead of stressing out and, maybe panicking, you just stay rational, which I thought was super cool and might be worth people to, I don't know, kind of look into that, and something that you deal with while playing your own sessions. I don't know if you ever experienced something like that too, when you've had a really tough decision and you just kind of do that same process of falling back on your strategy and just coaching yourself through it.
Well, I mean, I just think that when you get really afraid, like when you get really panicked, your brain doesn't work properly. So you have to try to like hardwire it into functioning better. And you can do that through like checklists. Um, but yeah, like having like some sort of like algorithm where there are a bunch of steps that you can walk yourself through usually helps in situations like that, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, which is pretty common when, if you watch the seminars, right? When you're doing it, you pretty much go through the same process whenever you're making your decisions. You kind of have a step-by-step guide as to the things you think back on whenever you're in a spot. When it starts with the pre-flop strategy and to the flop strategy, whatever, you're going back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, I try. There's it's like the strategy that you're going to use should be very repeatable and should be overt. Like you should be able to tell it to someone else. Like what are the like the core variables that you think about that will drive the decision in this spot? Like what do you think is important to deciding how this spot works? And then the similar situations should have similar structures in terms of coming up with the answer. If you get presented with like similar poker problems, in my opinion, you should be using like a similar framework to solve for the answer, as opposed to like having these like radically different and diverging strategies for spots that look pretty much the same. So, um, yeah,
Yeah, people just coming up with
yeah, it's usually
other
when people want bullshit.
unnecessary factors that don't really matter.
Yeah, like like an amateur player, like their thought process isn't very structured, and so if you show them the same spot, like very similar situations, 10 different times, and they're sort of apart, they'll frequently like their thought processes will like diverge, sometimes in like opposite directions. For like maybe they call with in one of those 10 hands they call with ace high with like a bad straight blocker to go with it. Like they call with like ace eight high or something in a on a board with a 5 and a 6, and they block 7-8 or something, and they call with that hand, and then they fold in a similar spot. They fold a pair of fives, and you're just like, how are you making these decisions? And like the answer is like they're making the decisions based on emotion. Like they're they think both spots are close. They beat bluffs in both instances, and they thought the guy was bluffing, so they called, and they thought the guy had the nuts, so they folded. And it's like, um, and they'll make stuff up in the middle of that. But like what it really comes down to is like if they're feeling really good, if they're running really hot, they'll probably call more, and if they're running really bad, and they'll probably fold more. And like the thing that's driving their decision might be how the last 25 hands across other tables in other games went for them. And if they're, like I said, if they're crushing it, they feel like they can make the call and it'll work. And if they're getting blown out of the water, then it's a terrible call and they'll never make it. And people are like that. That's just the truth of what goes into a lot of decision making. And so if you can systemize it and structure it so that you've got some core variables that you focus on, that don't really move around very much, that some core questions that you're trying to answer before do I block my opponent's bluffs, do I block my opponent's value bets, do I unblock my opponent's bluffs, like do I think that this range, first of all you have to assess is like whether or not this range includes bluffs, like does is this player playing well enough for their range to include bluffs. The answer is usually yes, but occasionally the answer will be no, and then you can just fold. But yeah, like you have to organize it and you want it to be consistent. And people who attend the seminars, for example, know that like we're going to answer this problem in this way, and then like the next time that a problem that's similar comes up, we're going to answer this problem in the same way, and so on and so forth. And if you put in enough reps, then you get good at it because we're using the same strategies, the same systems over and over and over again. And so you put in enough reps, and then with the ultimate goal of having people play better, where generally speaking, I define better as poker play that a solver agrees with, like on average. That doesn't mean that like you're going to solve a spot and solver won't have a slightly different answer, but you want your EV to be relatively similar to um, the EV that the solver would have gained. Like you don't want to check a hand that's like worth infinite as a value bet, right? And you don't want to bluff with a hand that's like massively negative EV, right? But expecting your strategy to look exactly like the solver's strategy is unrealistic. Solver strategy is just someone else's strategy. Um, so yeah, there's a lot. There are a lot of things that are like that though.
Yeah, and on that topic, right? Because I gotta plug it. I did start your brand new course, which we're launching today, the multi-way systems course. So it's February 3rd. We're recording this, and yeah, I got through the first two systems, and it's just great how important the takeaways. At least for me, when I watch your courses, I get the most value on just kind of skipping to the main takeaways because that is what's going to resonate with me the most, and it's just that same approach where because I'll be honest, I've self-admittedly say I'm horrible at multi-way because I was in that phase where we started doing a lot of work with simple three-way, and then I just started doing all the business side things more, and studying just went way down, and that's why I was really looking forward to this course and happy that you were making it, because that's mainly for where I'm at today. I benefit the most, and it was that simple just bet for protection at the start, because I'm thinking to myself, I feel like I'm fucking up really bad in these in position C bet spots where I feel like I'm very inconsistent. I feel like I'm either too aggressive or too passive. So the idea that you would bet a lot of medium strength hands in position for protection, when you would think if you had a mixed strategy, you would be checking most of these hands in a heads up pot, but when it's multi-way, things change a lot. I thought just that little thing was great for me. I can't wait to finish the rest of it, but yeah.
Yeah, I try to like there's a certain sort of level of knowledge that I assume people have, which is in this case like that people understand mostly how heads up pots work, like how, and then the multi-way courses, a lot of it is highlighting where there are divergences in our strategy that's sort of meaningful, and then trying to make people more aware of like how this, like what the structure of multi-way pots looks like. So how different ranges should be constructed, as opposed to like trying to just be like, okay, well here you should bet 87%, and here you should bet check like 63%. Like that's ridiculous. Focusing a lot more on the general range structure in this spot is for this betting range to include all of your strong hands, and some medium strength hands and some air, and then for the checking range to be very dense, very weak hands, and then understand how that evolution takes place to your opponent's ranges on maybe the next street, and so on, so that you have a really good picture and a really good grasp of what types of hands you're likely to be up against without getting so focused on, again, like 28% do this, 74% do this, or some bullshit like that. So yeah, focusing more on like the big picture of what the ranges look like so that you can have pretty good strategies. You can kind of decide on the details yourself. Um, that's sort of like the main focus of it. But I try to make everything very easily actionable. Where
Yeah, you do.
yeah, like I focus a lot on like what I think the limitations are of someone who's going to try to implement what we're talking about, and making sure that it's very easy to do exactly what I'm recommending, as opposed to saying like a solver's doing this, so you have to do it. Like that's great, but like how does this human guy that's watching a course for 10 hours total, like that's the whole course or whatever it is, I don't even know the length, but how is this person going to pull this off, like with a reasonable expectation? Like, do you really expect the student to be able to do this? I think a lot of people are less concerned with that than they should be. So um, at the same time, you don't want to come up with like really shitty strategies, right? Like you don't want your strategies to just like underperform um, someone who's playing really well and studying a lot. So your strategy has to be both very good at a theoretical level, but also easy to implement at a practical level. So and then yeah, I kind of focus the course and all of my coaching at the moment really in those kind of two directions.
Do you think excuse me, do you think someone should have a strong understanding of heads up pots before they jump into your multi-way course?
I mean, I think it depends on how you define strong, but I would say that you want to focus on heads up. If you've never studied heads up pots, then you would want to study heads up pots first. Like if you're brand new to the game, start with something heads up. Start with simple poker systems, for example, right?
Right.
Like just start with that, and then graduate to the multi-way systems thing, as opposed to going the other direction, right? So like if you're starting, start with simple poker systems, then work on multi. Don't go the other direction. Don't start with multi-way and then go to simple poker systems. That's a bad idea. But you don't have to be like, it's not as though after you watch simple poker systems, which again is, let's just call it ballpark 10 hours. It's not like after you watch that, like now you're a high stakes savage who can just crush everyone in heads up pots, but you suck multi-way. So you should get, you don't have to be that good, but the order of operations would be like study heads up pots first and then multi-way pots second.
Yeah, I will say it is, so far from what I've watched, it's very digestible. So it's nothing overwhelming to just jump into this multi.
Yeah, I mean, you have a good foundation of poker knowledge too, though. So I mean, like, and you don't
Yeah,
you like it's difficult to, like, very difficult for me, but it's difficult to like how ignorant is the person that's trying to learn from this? You know what I mean? In terms of poker, right? Like in terms of poker. So like how much do they not know? Because there there are so many things that you take for granted that you know that other people don't know. Um,
100%. Yeah, that's
yeah,
actually what I'm
but
struggling with right now when I work with people.
yeah, but then at the same time, like you don't want to be boring, right? Like you don't want to be hammering away at things that your audience definitely knows that you're just wasting their time, right? So
For sure.
you
Yeah.
got yeah, so you've got to kind of strike the balance there, and
That comes with
yeah,
asking questions and thinking or
yeah, it's
getting
difficult in a course format though, right? It's difficult in a course format where there's
very
no
true.
feedback.
Yeah.
But yeah, like live, you can just ask questions. Um, but yeah, I mean, I would say start with heads up pots, then go to multi-way pots, but don't feel like you have to be like some high stakes crusher to learn from the multi-way course. It's just if you want to learn multi-way pots and you feel like it's very like there's a lot of EV there for you, which would usually be the case if you've done like a good amount of studying heads up, right? Like what ends up happening in anything you do is you get diminishing returns, right? So like if you've never studied poker before, you'll get a lot better by studying in the beginning, right? And then after you've been studying for a lot for like 10 years, it starts to get harder to get better, right? It's just harder, especially if you're just doing it by yourself. Because if you don't change the way that you study, and you just keep studying the same way for 10 years, you'll have squeezed a lot of the juice out of that, right? Obviously, you could hire a different coach and they could give you a totally new perspective on things. That's different. But if it's just you doing the same approach to studying, the longer you do it in a specific area, the less fruitful it becomes. That's actually the whole goal. Like the goal is when you study in the first place that you get better. And so, if that's what's happening, then the better you get, the harder it is to get a lot of juice out of studying. And then most people haven't studied multi-way pots for a few reasons. The tools aren't as good. Even the tools I was using aren't as good. The tools aren't as good. Um, that's the main one. The tools aren't. It's slower. It's clunkier. It takes way more time. There's much less publicly available content that's focused on it. So for most people who are like intermediate players, it's whereas you're not a very day one beginner, focus on heads up pots. But if you're like an intermediate player, there's probably a lot of EV for you in studying multi-way pots just because most people haven't put nearly as much time there as they have in other areas of the game.
Yeah. Do you think if you're a, because I actually want to go back to something that you said in terms of just talking with different people and studying on your own, do you think it's imperative that you have a network of people if you were an active, let's say, mid stakes MTT grinder trying to make it?
Um, not really. I think that there are a lot of um pretty introverted people without a network who can make it. But you have to be very, very, very driven. It's difficult to because I'm going to sound like an asshole when I say it this way, but like I had a network that when I came up, right, I had roommates. I lived with a guy, Frenza. I lived with Connor B1. I had two guys that lived downstairs, Ian Motter, so Mozilla PL, and uh, um, like Abaddon 85, Lenny. I also had like Frank Thomas 8, who was a high stakes heads up player who had some problems, who lived with me for a while. I had like Mr. Paintball, Maddie. I had Hope as Ace live with me, Jean Pascal. So like I had, you know, David, Miss Oracle, David Yan, high stakes,
How
right?
many you had like a like a hotel of running poker players just coming in and
Yeah, so I
out?
mean, like it's obviously I had a network, right? So like
Yeah.
all these people lived in the house or lived in the same building below me, like
Oh,
a
okay.
couple floors. No, so most of them lived with me for at least briefly, right? So David Yan lived with
Hmm.
me for like only like a few weeks or something like that. Connor lived with me or below me for like a year. Neat Mar, who's awesome, love Neat Mar. He came out I think for like a month or something like that. Like I've had a lot of poker players that did that, but I didn't really like talking about hands. So like I had this network, but I wasn't like bouncing ideas off people that much. I never really liked talking about hands because I was always playing. Like I was always playing so much because I was grinding Supernova Elite. Like at the time that these guys lived with me, most of them I'd already done Supernova Elite at least once. Maybe with Nick, it was my first Supernova Elite round. Maybe. Um, Brandon, I forgot Mazarite, Brandon Rollinson, who's a coach at BBZ now. He lived with me for a couple of years as well. So yeah, so it's like I said, I've always had the network, and I don't know, I can't really divorce myself from it because like I grew up with one, like in poker, but um, at the same time, I hated talking about hands with people. so like I
Why?
wasn't like
Why? Why did
using it.
you? Why did you hate talk? Is it just because you wanted to keep your thoughts to yourself because you're playing against these guys a lot? Because you're playing sit and goes, right? So.
No, it's because like I never valued my opinion that highly, right? Like I know I'm a coach, and so other people value my opinion really highly, but I never valued my opinion that highly. And that's because I valued the opinion of tools like really, really, really highly, and I valued mathematics, like mathematic outputs, really, really, really highly. So I didn't really care what you had to say. I mean, like I didn't really care what I had to say either. Like I didn't care what your opinion was. Like if I played a hand a certain way, I didn't really give a shit what you thought about it. And it doesn't really matter. It didn't really matter who you were. Like I didn't really like. I wanted to hear other people talk about hands and hear their ideas. I used content for that, so that like if people were going in different directions with their thought process, I could use those ideas if I thought those ideas were good, right? But like hearing about, like, and I love Nick, right? But like hearing Nick talk about a hand while he's eating a sandwich, like I just do, bro. Like, just can we talk about something else? Like, come on, bro. Like, like I just played for 10 hours. Like, I just don't care. And even amongst high level players, a lot of the strategy focus ends up just being about like the big hand that they played, where it's like, dude, I'm trying to figure out like if I should be min raising with like 7-2 offsuit into this nits big blind. You know what I mean? Like that's what I'm trying to figure out. I'm not trying to figure out like if I should, if you should have bet folded kings on the river. Like you know what I mean? Like I'm just like, how do we, like, at the time it was really difficult for me to or on the turn even more complicated because the turn has still more equity implications on the next street, right? Like I don't know how to solve that. I don't know how you don't know how to solve that. Like both of us don't know the fucking answer. So like we're just gonna sit here and argue and like make no progress. Um, and that's how I felt. I know that a lot of other players had really really different experiences, um, but yeah, I trusted math and tools like from like Go over everything else. So I had like a notebook and I would like sit down at night and I would just like write in a notebook like different math, um, like different strategies, like different kind of like trying to resolve like equilibriums and figure out like how MDFs worked on different streets and like I would just like play around. Um,
Yeah. What tools did you have back in those days?
Yeah, so I mean, like ICMizer was a big tool for a large fraction of my career, and that would be like pre-flop ICM, which I cared a lot about.
Yeah.
I played sit and goes for the most part. Sit and go wizard was a tool that I used for like very briefly. ICMizer came out like shortly, like pretty quickly, so I used that. I watched a lot of cash game content, and like that's sort of the same thing, right? Like I didn't think I was good, and the people who lived with me were always my peers. And so like I didn't think they were particularly good either, right? But I would watch content because I would be watching like guys playing like super high stakes. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
the stakes that don't exist, in cash games, like they might be playing like 500,000 or something online. Or, like, you know what I mean? Like just like ridiculously high stakes heads up. And like listening to how those guys think, and yeah, how those thought processes worked. Um, and then trying to take what I could to apply to sit and goes, which is obviously like a very different format. Um, and then I would watch like sitandgogrinders.com where a lot of my competition would make content. And then I would just explore like the way that they thought about the game and how vulnerable it was mathematically. Hmm. So you had like guys that were like deliberately folding like 80% of their big blinds. And I would just raise any two cards on the button into players like that. Like, but those strategies were like common. Like they had this thesis where like, that they would play like nits until the ICM started in a sit and go. So until they got deeper, like they didn't want to lose their stack until the ICM kicked in. Like there was this kind of meta belief that that was the right way to play poker. And I was like, all right, well, that's really vulnerable to like if I me just raising the button all the time. So
Yeah.
and I did things like that. So
Okay, I'm gonna pivot the conversation because I did want to bring this up because we talked about it briefly, just you and I in DMs when we were talking about investing. Because I actually do think it is valuable for people to hear this, and from your perspective, obviously. So, for context, the conversation basically started where I was just asking or I was cracking a joke actually, and then and then it sparked into something entirely different. But basically, if you were asked the blank question, or a friend came up to you and said, "Jordan, I see everything you're doing in poker. It seems very fun and a viable thing to do as potentially a career," and they asked you what you thought about them going the professional route of playing poker, what would you say?
I'd probably start with the have an approach that's similar to like something that Dana White says about fighters in the UFC, right? I don't think poker is really a career. Like I never viewed poker as being like a career. It's turned into that for me. Like I'm still here, I'm still doing it. I've done very well, but I viewed poker or still do kind of view poker as like an opportunity that you can just like go grab and sprint at. So like career to me implies, like accounting, right? Like, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, we'll probably still need accountants. How long does the game of Texas Hold'em, which is the game that I'm good at, in a sit and go or tournament variant, how long is that mineable for money? And it's like a very specific gambling game. And you could argue like, you could play PLO and like, different gambling games or whatever. But um, how durable is that? I don't know. So I would say that if someone approached it like, yo, I want to do this as a career, I would be like, man, I don't know if this is really a career. I would always ask them like, what are you doing instead? So if someone came to me and they said like, hey man, like I really love poker. Actually, this conversation happens all the time now with people in real time. So I do
Yeah.
this where they come to me and they say like, I really love what I'm doing. I love studying with you guys. I'm doing great. I'm making like pretty good money. I'm like, all right, like what do you do? And they're like, I'm a lawyer. And I'm like, okay. Or in Schwib's case, he's like, I'm an accountant. He works in accounting. And I'm not trying to sell Schwitz's life story here. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just saying, like, they have like real professions,
It's a
like
good
real
one
jobs. They
though.
make,
I was gonna
yeah,
bring
they
him
make,
up. Yeah.
yeah, they make good money, right? And should I transfer? And I'm like, probably not. Um, but it's conversely, if they said like, I'm 28 years old and I work, and this is no disrespect, but I work at any occupation where I'm making like 14 USD an hour equivalent, something low. I'd be like, bro, poker is for you, my friend. You know what I mean? Like, if you have the intellectual horsepower to do it, um,
I
then
think if you're making all right, I
yeah,
shouldn't say. No,
they
I
could
was
still
gonna
have the
say if you're
intellectual horsepower for
28
sure.
and doing 14 an hour, I
I mean,
mean,
all you have to do to be in that spot is just be like, it's super easy to be in that spot if you're like 19 years old in the United States and you beat somebody up and you go to jail. You could be smart as
right.
fuck and you might spend the rest of your life making, struggling to make a lot of money per hour. So it could have happened to me a lot. And yeah, so like if you find yourself in a situation where like you think you can compete for like a number of reasons,
Hmm.
but your opportunity cost is very low for could be for a number of reasons, then yeah, like go for it, right? But if you have a super high opportunity cost, like if you're like, hey, Jordan, I grew up in New York. I go to MIT. Both my parents are doctors. I'm really good at poker. Should I stop going to MIT to play poker? I'd be like, no way,
No.
bro.
Yeah.
No way. Um, but I mean, like that's just like that's sort of like my framework for making decisions. Some people would still decide to play, and they think that it's worth it. I would say that they might regret their life choices in a few years, but maybe they don't. I don't know. But
I think it depends on like okay, so actually I have, I think one of the characteristics to really make it in poker, if you would agree with this, is persistence. I think but not in a ignorant way, right? Like you're obviously doing all the right things, but you'll just never quit. Because what I was gonna ask you is, what do you think is the biggest reason why people fail at poker? The guys that are grinding mid stakes and then just hit a ceiling, it feels like for them, and just end up getting a 9 to 5.
oh, there's just way too many there.
Like
Like
a general yeah, I mean I know we've
people
worked.
quit for all kinds of reasons. I mean, like there's just so many reasons, and they're all so common. Like there are so many different versions that get you like of the story that get you to I didn't make it. Um, that it's hard to say. Like the most common ones are they don't work as hard as they think they work. That's the easiest one. The easiest one is they don't work that hard. They think they work hard, but they don't. That's the easiest one, and that's like really insulting. And I don't like but it's the truth. Like the truth
I
is
agree, yeah.
they don't work as hard as they think they work. And there are like a bunch of different versions of that. Another version is like they ran like shit if they're playing tournaments. If you just run really bad, you'll run out of money. You just will run out of money. If you run really bad and it's tournaments only, you run the risk of running out of money, right? Like that was the nice thing about the way that I approached it was with sit and goes, right? Was I was never going to run out of money, and I don't say that like from a place of ego or something like that. But I was beating 18-man tournaments for like 14% or something, right? These are tournaments that took 40 minutes. I didn't have losing months, right? When I was starting, like for like the first couple of years, I didn't really have losing months. You know what I mean? Like a big win rate, small field size, not going to lose. You know what I mean? Small win rate, huge field size, disaster. Okay, so like if you are a very like low edge player, like you're just not that good, and you play MTTs, which have massive volatility, then your income stream is going to be super volatile, and whether you make money this year or next year is sort of a flip. Um, Even if you're a winning player, if it's a modest edge, like that's what you're signing up for. And you should understand what you're signing up for. There's a tool called Prime Dope that you can use where you can go figure out exactly what kind of variance you're exposing yourself to. Everybody should use that tool, but it's free. But you know, yeah, I mean, like that's people don't work hard enough. People run like shit, which is just real if they're in a high variance format. But a part of that is like, how did you structure your game selection? How did you structure? How much action are you selling? Whether it's all of it if you're staked, or parts of it, like the riskiest parts, if you're really good and you have people that trust you, some people, not very many, but some people can get themselves deals where they sell the riskiest parts of their action and have like buyers on a consistent basis for the riskiest parts of their action while they retain the most lucrative, lowest risk parts of their action. How much of that are you doing? Um, so like, but there's a million things that go into that, right? Like, if you have a drug problem, which is about as probably, I don't know, maybe slightly more common in this profession than others, just because to start playing poker professionally, you have to be comfortable at least at the margins doing something that other people don't think you should do, because other people won't think it's a great idea for you to start gambling all the time. Most people won't think that that's a great way to spend your time. Um, so yeah, there's probably like a slightly higher, like slightly above average risk of becoming an addict in a different way. If you do, you're fucked in this profession, in my opinion. Even I know some guys that still manage to pull it off, but it's way harder for them. It's way harder. Being broke in poker, we make money with money. Like, money to a poker player is like wood to a carpenter, right? Um, and in poker, if you run out of money, you can't just go to the store to buy more, right? Like, if you want to go to the store to buy more money, like, you got to get staked and give up half your profits. You've got to potentially quit, right? It's just really difficult. So you could run out of money for a bunch of reasons. You have bad life habits. You could not work hard enough. Like, all of those are like equally, they take up equal fractions of the pie. I think, for why people don't make it.
Right.
Sometimes they're not smart enough. Sometimes they're not smart enough. Like, sometimes there's someone who just like they just don't have. It's an intellectual competition. I mean, like, that's what it is. Like, at the end of the day. So like, if you can't think fast enough, that's gonna be something that gets in the way. Like, if you took an IQ test and you definitively knew that your IQ was like 85, and you also know that you suck at mathematics, and you insist on trying to be a professional poker player, I mean, it's probably not the game for you. Like, you should probably do something else. Maybe you think really well with your hands. Like, maybe whatever. It doesn't matter. But like, if you're not good at math games, and you have a below average IQ, competing with people who have an above average IQ who are really good at math games is probably not the best way to bet,
Yeah.
right? Like, and that's just, again, that's just objectively true. I'm not trying to like
No, I'm the same way. It's
politically
why
say
I never
anything.
played football. I wouldn't last if I tried to play the NFL. I took one hit and I'm probably dead.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah. So exactly, like, poker has its own version of that, right? So like, if you're 4'11" and weigh 90 pounds and you're trying to make it in the NBA, like, probably not the best idea.
No.
Probably not, right? So
I think the
like,
shortest guy in the NBA is like, I think there was a guy named, he was actually like 5'9", 5'8".
sure. So I
Yeah.
think the average adult male is like 5'7" or something. So I
Yeah.
can't remember though. I
But
don't remember.
yeah. So do you think um what because obviously there's tiers of players in poker, right? There are, you have the guy who will just play a $20 ABI, make a living that way, right? There are countries in the world that you can sustainably beat a $20 or a $15 ABI and live quite comfortably. So what do you think separates the players from the top 0.5%, so like the nosebleed guys that compete at the highest level? Is it simply just work ethic, you think?
No, I mean, they're also smarter than you.
Right.
I mean,
Okay.
like,
So
it's a combination of like, how hard do they work, how how effectively do they learn what is like a very competitive strategy, right? So sometimes someone might not even be like that smart, although they're not going to be stupid, but they might not be that smart, but maybe they're best friends with pads, you know, like, because they're best friends with pads, like, they get access to to someone who can help them with, like, figuring out high level strategy really quickly.
mhm.
Um, and he can provide a bunch of shortcuts to getting to high stakes for that person, that someone who's very similar in a lot of respects won't be able to pull off. I mean, like, that's just facts.
Mhm.
Um, and now I guess I gave a human shortcut in terms of getting better, right? But somebody, same thing, right? Someone who by chance like sees an ad for BBC Poker and bbcpoker.com, and they're very similar in a lot of respects to the human that doesn't see that ad, and then this person ends up subscribing for $75 a month, and they watch all the content. They just like consume everything because they're trying to get better. And the other guy just plays a lot. Okay, in 2 months, the dude who like paid $75 and or $150 across 2 months, and then watched all the content, like just devoured it. That guy's gonna smash the other guy. He's gonna smash him. It's not close, right? It has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with me, right? Like if they just watch all of Pwn Diddy's content and all of Bowie Effects content and all of Ape Styles content, and they just watch and all of Yargo's content, and they do that, and they ignore my content, and they do that for like 2 months straight, and they just devour it. And this other guy is just like playing a lot, trying to figure it out on his own. Dude, he's screwed. That guy's drawing dead. Like he's drawing dead. Like to beat the other guy, he's drawing stone dead. That guy is going to be trying to figure out what raise first in size to use because he doesn't know. He's going to be like, well, this is what the other guys are doing, and he has no method of like discerning what truth is because poker is pernicious that way, right? Like there's variance. You can win hands by playing them wrong, and you can lose hands by playing them correctly, right? So you learning that way is just awful, right? Same thing's true for like some of the highest level tools. Like if some guy sees an ad for GTO Wizard, right, and some other guy doesn't see the ad for GTO Wizard, so it doesn't have to be content. And then the guy that's fucking with GTO Wizard 24/7, trying to get better at poker while playing a little bit, versus the other guy who's just like playing all the time. The guy who's playing all the time is gonna get smashed in 2 months. He's gonna get smashed. It's not even close. It's not even close. So like, you don't necessarily have to be smarter. You can be lucky in terms of like but like if you have access to in some way like high level strategy, and then you can retain some of it, convert it to something you can use quickly. The solver approach is a little bit difficult just because converting a solver's output to a strategy for you is not the same thing, right? So I tell most people that what a solver does is it gives you the, like if you remember the math textbooks when we were in high school, at the back, for at least if you went to school where I went to school, the back of the math textbook had the
That's
answers
pretty
at the back
common,
of the
yeah.
book. Yeah, they had the answers at the back of the book, right? And so like you can go write down all of the answers at the back of the book when you're doing the homework, right? If you go into class and you didn't actually do the problems, when you get the test, you're screwed, right? Where in poker, the test is playing, right? And the answers at the back of the book are the outputs from the solver, right? And so if you take the time to figure out how to get the same answer as the solver consistently, you're good, right? Like that's what you need to be doing. You need to be trying to figure out how do I get the same answer that the solver is coming up with on a consistent basis, right? Or a similar answer to what the solver is coming up with on a consistent basis. If that's what you're doing, using a solver, and that's what you're doing, you're gonna go very far. You're gonna get very good very quickly, right? But if you're just like looking at the answers, you'll get a little bit better. In poker, it'll still account for something, but it's not going to be very helpful. So yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. It's a long-winded answer, but that's yeah, that's most of it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, what I thought is so true, which is hard for people to understand, is what you said earlier was just you can win by making the wrong decisions and lose by making the right. So when it's kind of what I was talking about at the beginning of the show, where you need to understand, if you understand how it works, then you should just be able to trust the strategy you're actually implementing. So when things are going bad, because you might start to question, what the fuck am I doing? When you're going on a bad run and you lose confidence and you just implode.
Yeah, I mean, it's helpful to have something that's to where you are reliably better than you were when you lost the money. Like that was my kind of crutch, and that's why I liked studying. That's why I was a big fan of studying all the time. Is like when you're losing, if you wake up and you know that you're a better player than you were yesterday, then you have a pretty rational reason to like re-enter the games that you got smashed in yesterday, or over the last 30 days or whatever. But if you're not meaningfully improving across time, then when you lose, like, why aren't you going to just keep losing? You know what I mean? So, yeah, that's how I think about that.
Yeah, I'm curious. So when you were coming up and playing all the time, what were some of the biggest sacrifices you had to make? Did you feel like you were making a lot of sacrifices when pursuing this quote unquote career?
I think that they sort of feel like sacrifices, but they sort of don't.
Yeah.
So you're aware, like I was aware of other things I could do with my time that other people wanted me to do, but I I was pretty happy to do what I was doing. You know what I mean? So like
Yeah.
it's debatable like how much they felt like real true sacrifices. But yeah, I mean, like I was playing all the time. You know, like I did a there's a video on YouTube where I just walk through my Sharkscope history, and I talk about, I don't know how many days I was taking off per year, but it was like 10 to 20 days a year or something like that for like half a decade. You know what I mean? So 5 years, something like that. Um, and yeah, I mean, like I know, like the Shark Soap's just like an objective record of what I was doing. So like obviously within that is like, my friends ask me to go out and I just say no. My girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, asks me to come see her, and I'm grinding for Supernova Elite, so I can only see you once every 2 weeks. I can see you once every 2 weeks for like a couple days. Once it's like December 14th or something, maybe it's December 11th. That was when I would have qualified for Supernova Elite. So for people that are curious what that is, it's basically where you, in the past, you would pay PokerStars about $180,000 worth of rake, and then they would give you back in cash about 120,000 of that. So you would have like a six-figure USD salary if you could break even in the games and pay them that much rake. As long as you could break even, you'd be doing pretty well. So it's important that you get all the way across the finish line, though, because the difference between almost getting there and getting there is enormous. So you have to get all the way there. Okay, you can't miss. So, like when I'm grinding and I need to work, like, see my girlfriend once every 2 weeks. And, as uh, I don't know how old I might have been. Maybe let's just call it 24. But I was like a 24-year-old man, like I want to get laid. You know what I mean? So like, I mean, like if I'm only seeing her once every 2 weeks, it's not happening for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So like those were real sacrifices. Because I tell you, I would have wished I would have seen her more. But there are bullshit sacrifices that are like,
Yeah.
that are in there where it's like, I didn't party as much. Like I don't know
Right.
how much I cared. Like I'm sure I cared a little bit, but like I was pretty happy to work my ass off. You know, uh, I was very close to homeless when I was 20. Like I had a friend who let me live with him. And so the place the house that I was living in, I got thrown out of that house. My stuff was all outside in the snow. There were no, like my stuff wasn't even in bags. It was just like I had shit inside of a room that I was renting, and then all of my shit, like piecemeal style, got thrown down the stairs into the snow. Um, and I had to like pack it up and put it into bags. And if this guy that, and I met this guy 2 weeks ago. I grew up in Arizona, and this was in Vancouver, and I wasn't living with family. My family didn't do that to me. So, my dad didn't live here. My mom, my stepdad didn't live here. They lived in the States. My mom didn't live here. My mom lived in the States. So, like, I came very close to being homeless. I grew up with like a very inconsistent like financial situation. Like, I lived in like 22, I think maybe homes. My mom was arrested. I was living in a single parent household with my mom. My mom remarried. My mom's been married like a bunch of times now. So yeah, like living 20 homes. Mom was arrested a few times growing up. No parents when my mom was arrested, so I would be at home. I wouldn't go to school, and I would watch my sisters and my brother. My sisters
Are you
being
the
much younger than
oldest?
me. Yeah, I'm the oldest.
Yeah. Okay.
So like I was very like when I started making like so when I got to Canada, I started working. I was working at 7-Eleven, which is like a convenience store, and I worked a graveyard shift, and I worked at a clothing store at the same time. So I was working like 80 hours a week. Worked both jobs full time, and didn't have a car, so walked to both jobs. So like after walking to both jobs and working 80 hours a week, I was just sleeping. That was my whole life. Um, and so like those were like minimum wage type jobs, right? And so when I started making like six figures playing fucking poker, I was like, yo, dude, this is dope. Like, all I want to do is this. I don't want to do anything else. Like, the club, I don't give a fuck about the club. You know what I mean? Like, girls, I mean, like, I want to get laid, but like, it's okay. You can wait 2 weeks. I got to get this paper. So,
So loyal, by the way.
what?
I think
Who's loyal?
most your wife.
Oh, sure.
I think most women would maybe bounce. Only seeing you once every 2 weeks.
I mean, that wasn't all the time. It wasn't all the time. It was just
Right.
like, but
Okay.
it would happen if like I started to fall
Infrequent.
behind. If I
Yeah.
started to fall behind on like the super, like my pace, right? Because Supernova Elite's a pacing thing. You're going to do it. Like for me, I knew I was going to do it in January, and by the end of the year, I knew it was going to be done. So if like I was like maybe a little bit behind pace, or I started to feel like it was getting a little tight, then I would be very disciplined. Like I can't see you until 2 weeks from now. As far as loyalty, like for sure, she was, like as far as I know, she's loyal, she's super loyal, right? Um, but
Yeah.
like I was also probably making more money than like everybody. Like not to disrespect her or anything, but like I was probably more successful than everybody else she knew. Like this is the price that I had to pay to be this guy.
Yeah.
So, you know, and again, not taking anything away from her, but also like there's that. So, yeah,
No, I think it's just good perspective for people. Like really, like you said, why most people fail is because they think they work harder than they actually do, and that's just really sums it up. You were grinding like pretty much six,
yeah,
seven
7.
days a week.
It was 7.
So yeah, that's what it took. What? Uh, okay. How did I have a good question here? Because you've obviously transitioned from playing a lot, and then now in recent years, like the last 5 plus 6 plus, you now coach a lot more than you do
Mhm.
playing. How did your mindset and approach to poker change once you transitioned from being mainly a player to coach? Did it change at all? Your perspective on poker in general, on how it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's changed. I mean, it has to change because you have to keep getting better, right? Even like coach, play, whatever, it doesn't matter. So like how I think has evolved a lot, right? So when I was first playing, I was enamored with the tools, as I said, tools, math, everything. Still am to a large degree, but a little bit less so. Um, and when I was playing a lot, the tools, like the strategies that the tools were recommending, were I don't want to say like relatively easy to implement, but the tools were limited, right? So like a large fraction of what was going on was like pre-flop, right? Like pre-flop tools, particularly in the games that I was playing. Um, and people can say like they're using tools like Flopzilla, and you can and that like that's I use that too. And then there was Card Runners, EV, and like as things got more technical, I took initially the kind of like pre-flop approach of like sort of perfection, like this kind of pre-flop, yeah, really pushing for like a perfect almost strategy where like my strategy wouldn't differ too much from a model to and I started trying to do that with post-flop tools because like I was using pre-flop tools and then I started trying to use post-flop tools. And that lasted longer than it should have probably. Where I was basically like trying to clone, like I was doing everything I could to like get to an exact solver output, and not having like EV tools also was a part of that because like if it's solver does something or doesn't do something, if it's just like kind of if when you're looking at it or not maybe not even the lack of the tool, but maybe the lack of appreciation for how helpful that part of the tool is. Um, if the solver doesn't do it and you do it and you don't know what the EV is, then as far as you know, your play sucks. Solver wouldn't do it, and you did it, so your play's shit. If that's the benchmark for whether your play is bad, then if it disagrees with you, then you suck. I mean, like in that spot, right? Like that's it's pretty black and white, right? But it's a solver, so it's basically using at the end of the day, it's going to kind of like self iteratively play and give you like a really solid strategy, right? But if like the EV is 0.1% higher using the solver's strategy or going this particular direction, and only 0.1% lower going the direction you went, you didn't really fuck up. Like, you know what I mean? Like the EVs are almost the same anyways. So like it doesn't really matter what you did. It's not a blunder. It's just like not what the solver did. Um, and so in the beginning, when I first started using solver tools, it has nothing to do with like, I mean, there are lots of evolutions that happen just with me coaching people too. But the biggest one, like the biggest shift is has been towards like looking at the EV of like the strategy or looking at how the spot works in terms of the composition of this range and whether the composition of my range or my student's range looks similar to like the way it looks the way that it should look, right? And whether the line like the EV of the lines that we're choosing are competitive and comparable to what's happening in the solver. That's where I'm at today. And through a and yeah, because of like my lack of experience with the tools, probably because they were new, and um, uh, and then the tools limited functionality. I don't know, like if the first tools had such a feature. necessarily. Um, the yeah, I don't know if I could, or but I certainly didn't think into the way that I think now, where it's like more about, is the composition somewhat comparable to like the solver's composition? Are we making the big strategic? Are we kind of in agreement on the big strategy that's going on here? And is the EV of what we're doing very competitive with the EV of what a solver is doing here? That's where I'm at today, and it took me a while to get there. And so that's like the biggest shift.
Yeah. Do you think, I guess to like kind of ask the same question, but in a different way, is just, did staking kind of change the way you think about that, that career option being viable? Because when you were playing, right, you were making all this money, it was going great, and you might think if you're doing it, maybe some other people can, right? Did staking really change that for you when you started working with more people and dealing with different types of human beings, that no, this is not for everybody?
Yes, for sure. But also it's sort of it's kind of complicated, like a lot of things are. So I think that at the individual level, if you have the self-awareness, this is very difficult to do. But if you have the self-awareness to like genuinely assess yourself and like what your skills are and who you are as a human, you might be able to, save yourself from a lot of heartache and like going in the wrong direction, essentially. If you can really honestly self-assess like what I'm good at, what I'm not good at. Most people can't do that, myself included. So most people, if they want to do something, they think they can do it, right? Like that's why there are so many companies, right? Even though like the burn rate, like the failure rate's so high, right? Like we have people that try because they really think they can be the one that'll do it. Um, and I don't think poker is any different. I don't, and I think that from the perspective of like maximizing your own fulfillment as a human, you have to sort of like try, right? Like again, if you are like a super robot and you can just be like, well, I'm this good at math and I'm this good at these other things, so I'm going to pick a thing that like I'm going to be optimal at over here. That's great if you actually have the like foresight and kind of like presence of mind to be able to self-evaluate like that, right? But more realistically, for most humans, like they're going to say, I can do it, I believe I can do it, and then just sort of like throw everything that they can into it. And I don't think like once you decide that you want to do it, you just have to go 100%, in my opinion. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question. So like I will encounter people that who just like me, if I were them, think that they can do it, but probably can't, right? And I'll tell them, I'll be like, maybe have you thought about doing something else? Like I don't want to like ruin your day, right? But if I don't want to. There are just like there are some. I'll be yeah. I'm very honest when I'm coaching people privately, and like if they have like really significant limitations in certain areas, I'm like, are you doing this casually? Like, what's the goal here? And it's like some guys like they're just like, listen, I know I'm not going to get to high stakes. I just want to beat mid stakes, and that's cool. But in those cases, I usually recommend that they stream, right? Like, try to find alternative ways to get a big bag. Because I just don't view poker as being super durable, but that might just be a bias of mine that's not even true. Because I'll be honest,
Oh,
poker survived a lot of things. You know what I mean? Like it's been around for a
yeah.
long time. It's proven to be extraordinarily resilient.
I think the
Like
streaming
right,
thing is so tough though to recommend that to somebody, because I think it's kind of the same thing. It's not
it's winner
necessarily.
take all. It's winner take all, but
Yeah,
there's less people doing it. So
it's also
I still
so
think,
fucking exhausting. Like
yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
like
like, yeah, but I don't like.
yeah,
Like I don't really care if it's hard. You know what I mean? I just don't think you can look at something like poker. Like you're not building like a 401k. Like you're not building a retirement account. You're not building a
right.
savings plan. So like if you're just like making the minimum and covering your expenses, you're like screwing up your life, in my opinion. In my opinion, like you have to be more ambitious than that. Not because you have to like be a badass with like a $3 million house and a fucking $200,000 car. Like not because of that, but because you're gonna turn 75. Like probably right. Like if you're growing up in a Western country and you have access to a computer and you can play poker for a living, unless something really awful happens, you'll probably get old, and you need to have money. You know what I mean? Like that's just the truth. Like you're gonna need to have money. So you need to make a lot of money above what you're gonna spend before you're 50. And like people be like, that's just bullshit. And I'm like, you're just stupid. Like if you don't think that that's true, like you're just dumb. Um, like you're not going to be 70 years old and like out competing people in poker. How do I know that? Like because like if you look at chess, it's just not realistic. You know, like just look at chess, right? Like you need to have like a certain amount of like intellectual horsepower, stamina, speed. All of those things are applicable to poker. To make a good living playing poker, you have to play more than one table if you're playing online. Like your ability to play like a bunch of tables at once is going to diminish over time. Um, how many hours you can sustain at like a really high level of output is going to diminish over time.
That's
You know,
the
so
biggest
like
thing.
all of those things, like if you think like I'm just going to make like a job in level of income, and it'll all be fine. Like when I say just a job, I don't. Again, I'm not even talking about. I mean, I'm not going to save anything. That's really what I'm referring to. If you're saying like I'm not going to save anything, or I'm not going to force myself to make enough money that I can have a significant amount of savings that are being generated as I'm playing, like through this period in my life, then you're doing yourself a massive disservice, like massive disservice, and you're going to regret it later, right? And like I have a philosophical perspective on like myself being like a community of selves, right? So like there's Jordan today who gets like the priority, right? But I still have to think about Jordan 5 years from now. I still have to think about Jordan 10 years from now, Jordan 20 years from now, right? And I don't want to do anything to fuck those guys. You know what I mean? Like that guy's not here yet. Jordan 20 years from now isn't here yet. Doesn't exist yet. But hopefully he's coming, right? And I don't want to do anything that puts that guy in like this horrible spot, right? So that doesn't mean I'm living for that guy, right? I'm here now, so I got to, I'm gonna have fun and gonna do shit. But I'm mindful of the fact that like that guy also exists. So yeah, I think that when it comes to poker, there's no built-in retirement plan, and I was very mindful of that, like very early on. Not when I first started, because when I first started, all I cared about was making more money than I was making at my job. But maybe like after 2 years, maybe even after a year and a half, maybe a year and a half, I was making so much money. I was starting to be like, okay, how long can I keep this shit going for? And how much money do I need to stop doing this? And how much money is enough money? Because like when I first started, I just wanted 100K, and I wanted 100K so that I could go to school, because I needed the money to go get a good job, right? Because I was working at 7-Eleven and like Urban Planet clothing store, and then like I was a door-to-door salesman for a little bit. And poker, like I was making enough money playing poker. I was like, fuck, I'm going to make enough money playing poker to get 100K. Then I'm going back to fucking school and I'm going to get the job that all these other guys right now that like they all want to leave so that they can play poker. And I'm like, you guys are crazy. That was like, all I wanted to do was be you. And then like I made 100K and I made it so fucking fast. I was like, I'm going to keep going. And so I was like, I'll make $1 million. And then once I made $1 million, I was like, okay, how much money do I need to stop? And I wanted to try to understand that. And that kind of came down to like, how much money do I want to spend per year, assuming like modest returns from an investment portfolio, right? And yeah, but I do think that like that happened, that thought process happened very, very quickly. Like I said, maybe a year and a half into my career, I started thinking about like what retirement would look like, how much money I need to make, like all of those types of things. So
You're different. Guaranteed. Most poker players that are a year and a half in are not fucking thinking about that.
yeah, I mean, like I was always afraid of
Has to do with
like
probably the way you were brought up, right?
yeah, I mean, like I was afraid of like losing everything a lot.
Yeah.
Probably helps. That's a part of probably why I never went broke. Is like I was always very paranoid about losing everything, going broke. Not being able to like pay for my like electricity, right? I had this was not rational, right? But I had $1 million and I would still like sort of worry about running out of money and like not being able to keep the electricity on, like the lights on. Like that's happened to me multiple times in my life. I've been evicted from multiple homes. So yeah, so even though there was no financial way for that to really happen, I was still worried about it. So I'm not like a great model for like mental health, I don't think, for people. I think that like I have my own problems. Money isn't one of them, but I have my own problems. So yeah.
Right. All right. I know you. I think it's you because I see that the BBZ poker account follows it. Did you follow an account on Instagram of this guy who interviews a bunch of billionaires on the street?
I didn't follow it. No.
You didn't follow it? I feel like it is the type of content that I feel like you would rather watch on on social media. I think
I
it's called
usually,
the,
I usually go
I think
ahead.
it's called the School of Hard Knocks or something. That's all I was gonna say.
No, yeah.
Um,
When it comes to following, I usually follow stuff that feel if there's like if there's like something like with like some animal getting like snapped in half or something, I'll follow that. And
oh
then
my god, what the
like
fuck?
yeah, like if there's like some crocodile like bites a leopard in half and just watch the thing explode, I'll follow that channel. And then if there's I just think it's crazy. And so I'll be like sitting there and I'm like, that's fucking dope. I'll press
I
follow.
kind of get it. It is fast.
And
Like, yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
You
exactly.
watch
It's
Planet
sick.
Earth and that type of shit.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
follow that. I'll follow that. And then like if someone's doing like something really meaningful with their channel, I'll follow it. Like out of support, I'll follow it, right?
right.
But even if I like the content, I'll just let the algorithm figure it out. Like even if I like it, I just like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then so I've watched the content that you said. Like
Okay,
I
so you
have
have
seen
seen
those.
that. Yeah,
I've seen
yeah.
that. Okay, I've seen those videos. Yeah, and I've watched like a few of them probably like from start to finish. But I definitely didn't follow the channel because it just doesn't. I wouldn't follow that type of channel. But I
Right.
would watch the content and like it would entertain me. So
Well, so I guess if I see any animals getting mauled on Instagram, I
press
know
follow, bro.
I know where it's coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah, so no, I just thought it was super cool because the questions that he asks and the answers are that he gets from these guys are quite similar to the answers that you give yourself. So before we wrapped up today, the one thing I just wanted you to give that little nugget of advice to somebody that doesn't give a fuck and is going to give it all he's got. What is the biggest piece of advice you would give to somebody that's playing poker professionally right now or making that jump?
The main piece of advice is to make sure that you actually give it everything that you've got. That you actually go 100%. I think that people think they're going 100% or they're trying really hard because everything's always relative. People always contextualize it in the context of a job, right? So I feel like when you talk to someone, like let's say you're giving advice or you're getting advice or you're relating to someone, right? Like someone you've got a buddy and he works 35 hours a week and that's like his full-time job, right? And so you're working 50 hours a week and you're like, dude, I'm pushing it super hard. Like I'm trying, like, and it's like you're just outworking that dude with a job. You know what I mean? Like, you're not giving it 100%. You're just working harder than Frank. Like that's all you're doing. Um, so if you're going to pursue poker, especially in like a in an expensive country to live in, where the reason it's expensive for the most part is because you can get jobs that have reasonably high incomes associated with them, right? So that means your opportunity cost is higher. Whereas if you live in a job that's cheaper to live in, oftentimes it's because it's not easy to get high paying jobs. And so you have lower opportunity costs available to you. So you're going to be, poker from that perspective is easier. But in any case, especially when you live in a Western country or a country with just a high cost of living, with high opportunity costs, if you're going to give 100%, don't compare yourself to the guy with the job. That's a huge like disservice to yourself, right? Go to SharkScope, go to YouTube, watch the video that I put out where I talk about my SharkScope graph. So it's all objective. It's not my opinion about what happened. Just go look at how much work I put in, and that's just the playing part. That doesn't show you the studying. That doesn't show you building BBZ staking. That doesn't show you any of the staking work. Doesn't show you any of the coaching hours that I was putting in. Um, it doesn't show you any of the books I was reading. None of it. That's just the fucking games, the days that I played poker. Go look at it. Okay? And then compare yourself to that guy. Okay? And if you think you're working super hard, go see what really hard work looks like, right? Like I did that work, right? So like it is what it is. Like I did it and it's not like bragging or anything along those lines. It just is what it is. I worked all the time. And if you think you're pushing super hard and you're going to give it 100%, don't compare yourself to your buddy who's working 30 hours a week or 35 or 40 hours a week, whatever it is today. Um, uh, Go compare yourself to me if you think you're giving it 100%. See how it's going.
If you get
So,
close, you're not going to fall short. It's not going to
yeah, I
be
mean, like,
that
listen,
bad.
like that's what
Yeah.
100% is. Like that's what
Yeah.
my 100% was. Like I was trying everything I could. You have to have like some life outside of it, right? Like the girl, my girlfriend at the time, like so that you stay sane. You know what I mean? So you have to go to the gym, right? So that in my opinion, you have to stay in reasonable shape if you're going to demand that your body play like tons of hours at a high level. that you don't make yourself feel like shit unnecessarily, right? Like you're trying to put good food in, like trying to exercise, all of that. So all of those things are important for sure. But yeah, I would just say that that would be the main thing about going 100%. Just
Do you
like
think
actually go
that's the
100%.
main contributor to why people burn out is just because they focus too much on the game without focusing on those other things like eating healthy, working out? They're literally just rolling out of bed. Because honestly, that kind of sounds like what you did, but maybe you're just built different. Roll out of bed, play poker,
I mean, I would roll
study,
out of bed and play,
and then
and
go
then,
back to the game.
but I would also go to no, I would go to the gym for sure. I would go to the gym
Okay,
like
so
every day.
you were going to the gym even when you were in
Hundred
your
percent,
yeah.
100%. I
Okay,
was
that's
always in
good.
the gym. Yeah, I basically treated poker like I was an athlete, as opposed to treating poker like I was a guy with a job.
I
Like
think that's how you
everything.
need to treat it. By the way, like I do think you need to treat it like you're a professional athlete.
Yeah. So there are a few
Yeah.
things about being a professional athlete, right? Number one is, in my opinion, I don't know anything about being a professional athlete because I wasn't one. But like my understanding is that like the things that are around what you're doing as opposed to just the job, right? If you go to work and you have, I don't know, some job and you don't have to like kind of maintain like your education while you're doing the job, right? You just like go do the job, and then when your 40 hours are done, you go home and the job is done, and then you can go do whatever you want, right? Life doesn't really work like that in poker or if you're an athlete, in my opinion, right? Like when the job part's done, what you eat matters. When the job part's done, how much you sleep matters. When the job part's done, going to the gym and training other things matters. When the job part's done, especially in poker, like learning matters, right? How much are you studying? How much do you keep getting better? All of those other things matter. So yeah, it's more holistic, I would say. But I also think like a lot of people treat their jobs like that. Like a lot of people have a profession, and like especially like doctor would be a classic example, right? They have to keep up with like the modern treatments, right? um and a lot of doctors treat their bodies really well because they want to have they want to be able to perform for their patients and stuff like that, right? So they go to the gym and they stay in shape and all that. So it's not that people don't do it in professions, it's just that it's less obvious that you have to do it in a regular profession, like I would say. It's
Yeah,
less
for sure.
obvious. Yeah. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
mostly
I
it.
mean, I thought about it a lot more because I'd watch. I'm pretty sure I mentioned it before. Like JJ Redick, he's a former NBA player, and he had a really good podcast bringing in all sorts of NBA guests, and they talk about the other half of the league that basically doesn't care. Because I follow sports a ton, and you just see it all the time where a guy just kind of shows that he's very talented in this first, few years of playing in whatever sport, and then he falls off like a cliff. And I'm like, probably because he just doesn't give a fuck anymore.
Sure.
He caught the money, and he's just done, and he doesn't care about taking care of himself, or even just doesn't care about the game itself anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's
Yeah.
insanely
The
important.
peripheral
I think, in
stuff
poker.
matters. Yeah, the peripheral
Yeah.
stuff matters.
Mm-hmm. All right, man. Well, this was a good conversation. We can end it there.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, I had fun. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Buy the multi-way systems course.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Go get something simple. Go get simple poker systems first. But if you're good at
Yeah.
heads up pots, yeah, go ahead and check out Multiway.
Awesome. All right. Thank you,
Awesome. Thanks,
Jordan.
man. Yeah, cheers,
Bye.
bro.